All right, welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. You know, we're always bringing you the latest and greatest from the crypto world, right? And today, we're diving into something particularly interesting. I think it's the debut of the very first US-based XRP ETF.
Oh, yeah, that's been big news.
It has been making the rounds. And we're going to be looking at some reporting from TradingView on this. Really want to unpack what this launch means, you know, how it's performing and what it could tell us about the bigger picture in the crypto market.
Yeah, definitely a lot to dig into there.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just jump right in. What's the first thing that pops out to you when you look at this whole XRP ETF launch?
Well, I gotta say, the initial trading volume, it's got to be the initial trading volume. That's the thing that always catches my eye with these new launches, right? It's like, okay, is there interest, right?
Yeah, exactly. And with this Tukrium, it's a mouthful. It's the Tukrium 2X Long Daily XRP ETF, ticker symbol XXRP.
XXRP. Okay. Yeah. So, $5 million traded on its first day.
5 million. That's a pretty decent chunk of change.
Yeah. And actually, the TradingView article, they quoted Bloomberg analyst Eric Belchinus, and he called that very respectable.
Very respectable. I guess the question is respectable compared to what?
Well, they put it in context. That 5 million puts this new XRP ETF in the top 5% of all new ETF launches of all time.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's suggesting that there is a lot of interest out there, you know, especially after all the back and forth and uncertainty around XRP with the SEC and everything. So, you know, people are clearly waiting for this. There's pent-up demand.
Absolutely. I think that's what it's pointing to for sure.
So, top 5%. Okay. Now, I'm curious, how does this stack up against other crypto ETFs that have been launching recently?
Good question. And the article actually makes a pretty interesting comparison. They say that XXRP actually substantially outperformed the leveraged Solana ETF that was launched by Volatility Shares recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's, I think, a pretty good point of comparison. You know, similar type of product, but for Solana, this XRP one seems to be, you know, garnering a lot more interest.
So, the appetite is there. It seems like there's maybe even more excitement around this XRP product than other crypto ETFs, at least in this early stage.
At least that way.
Yeah. And to that point, the article even mentions a quote from John Dion. He's a pro-XRP lawyer, you know, big game in the XRP community. He was even a former Senate candidate.
Oh, right. Yeah, I remember that.
He said on X, XRP has much more appeal than industry players want to admit. What do you make of that statement?
Well, it definitely suggests there's a pretty dedicated investor base for XRP, right?
Yeah. And even with the SEC lawsuit still kind of hanging over everything, it makes you wonder, you know, is this ETF launch a sign of that underlying enthusiasm finally having like a regulated outlet?
Yeah, that's a good point. So, okay, let's unpack this ETF a little bit more. You know, it's called the 2X Long Daily XRP ETF, offering, you know, 2X leveraged exposure via swaps. Okay, what does all that jargon actually mean for, you know, the average investor?
Yeah, it can be a little confusing, but basically it's designed to give you twice the daily percentage change in XRP's price, right? So if XRP goes up 5% in a day, this ETF theoretically would go up 10%.
Oh, so it magnifies the moves.
Exactly. Yeah. It uses swap agreements, which are kind of like derivatives, to amplify those returns.
Okay.
And, you know, importantly, the article stresses that this makes it, you know, primarily a tool for short-term bets. You know, people who are trying to capitalize on price swings. It's not really designed for like long-term buy and hold investing, right? So short-term speculation is the name of the game here.
But this is where things get interesting. The article also points out that even with all this, the ETF launch, and Ripple just announced a big acquisition,
Yeah.
the price of XRP is actually down like more than 5% in the past 24 hours.
So, is that not a little counterintuitive? I mean, wouldn't you expect, good news, ETF launch, price goes up?
It seems logical, right? But it highlights an important point. I think even a successful ETF launch doesn't automatically mean the price of the underlying asset is just going to take off. Yeah, there's a lot of other factors at play.
What kind of factors?
Well, broader market conditions, overall investor sentiment. There could be other news events happening, maybe some negative news out there that's offsetting things, right? So, it's a complex picture. But what's really fascinating to me is that despite this downward pressure on the price of XRP itself, the ETF is still seeing that really strong trading volume, that very respectable, as they called it.
So for our listeners who are, looking for those quick but thorough insights, why should they care about this? Why is this ETF launch and its, kind of surprising performance so noteworthy?
Well, I think it gives us a really valuable early signal about the level of demand for XRP exposure in the U.S. market, specifically through a regulated investment vehicle like an ETF. And even with, some of that negative sentiment around and the recent price drops, that initial trading volume, it tells me there are a lot of investors out there who are really interested in trading XRP.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly with a leveraged product like this, that's geared towards those short-term movements.
Yeah. Okay. So, let's do a quick recap here for everybody. The first US-based XRP ETF, pretty strong debut out of the gate. Top 5% of all new ETF launches, and that's considered very respectable trading volume.
Absolutely.
All of this happening while XRP itself is actually experiencing some, price decreases. So, it's a bit of a mixed bag?
Yeah, definitely a mixed bag. And I think the real question to consider moving forward is, what does this, quote unquote, respectable trading volume for a leveraged XRP ETF tell us about the appetite for these different types of crypto exposure, right? Especially when the underlying asset itself is giving these kind of mixed signals. That's what I'm going to be watching.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to leave it on. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. So, thanks for breaking this down with us today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.